As I mentioned earlier, my contact details, a link to my GitHub, a link to my LinkedIn. Feel free to jump on and connect with me through those side of things. Who here uses Copilot today? Who uses it probably every day, do you think? Who has a Copilot license and has never actually logged in and touched it? And I ask that because I'm a consultant and I spend a lot of time going into organizations. Yeah, we've got 200 Copilot licenses and 17 of them are in active use. Why? A lot of it, though, is because people don't know where to get started. Who has not had a chance to use Copilot yet? Anyone? Yeah, a couple of people. So looking to learn and understand what Copilot can do for you. So that's great. It's a big thing to get involved in. It is so much information around about the whole agentic coding side of things. What does this all mean? How do we do this? That it feels really hard to get involved. Sometimes you find a lot of people, they kind of start. They get stuck in and they generate something and the first 3 attempts go okay. And then suddenly it just falls off a cliff. And everybody's like, what just happened? Why is it now spouting nonsense at me? I'm going back to doing it myself because it's easier. But these coding agents are here to stay. They're a tool for us to use in order to improve what we can already do. And so what I want you guys to get out of this, and I apologize, this is going to be a heavy, I'm going to talk at you for a lot of times, but if you've got questions, stick your hand up. I'm happy to answer and talk about questions on the way through. And if you're online, feel free to drop questions in the chat as well. We'll come to those towards the end as well with that there. So I do want to answer those questions as we work our way through, but I don't have much in the way of demos. And that's because there's a lot of content here. What I kind of expect is some of it will go in, a lot of it will go over everybody's head, but the recordings will get up and you can come back and pick up things on the way through. And what I challenge you in this today is to find maybe 2 things on the way through for those of you that are using Copilot at the moment that you can take away and implement tomorrow. And then in a week's time, come back, find another 2 things that you can implement and just slowly improve what you're doing on the way through. If you haven't started, hopefully this will give you an opportunity and the encouragement to actually dive in and go, you know what, we can do this. We can actually get this going from here. And if you want to learn about Copilot and what's going on and kind of where to go, here are 3 good training courses that you can go through. So the Getting Started one here is Microsoft Learn. The second one, Copilot Fundamentals, is through GitHub itself. And then the third one, Master Copilot, is again back to Microsoft Learn. So take the opportunity to jump into those links there as well. Run through those trainings. They'll set you up from the basics of what is Copilot, how do I get started, how do I do all of this, what are the fundamentals I've got to understand, but then getting into how do I do some of the more advanced tasks on the way through. So it's a great way to do it, and those courses are all pretty hands-on. They'll step you through, they'll get you into the code and doing stuff on the way past. Right, so the first thing to know when dealing with Copilot and improving and supercharging your workflow is to master your models. The point of this is it's so easy for us to just jump in and by default, Copilot's going to drop you into GPT-5o Mini. If you've not used it before, that's where it's going to start. And that's great. GPT-5 Mini is a great coding tool, but it has its limitations. It has its strengths, it has its weaknesses. So do all of the models. They've got their strengths, they've got their weaknesses. So spend a few minutes to actually get in, and the link, the QR code on the right there is the link to the GitHub page, which details the available models and what they're recommended for. And this is just a snapshot taken off there of a selection of the different models that are available. And so you've got there 4.1, fast, accurate code completions. GPT-5 works best if you give it well-defined tasks and you've got precise prompts. If you go, create me a website, GPT-5 Mini is going to fail miserably. But if you give it a nicely crafted set of prompts about what you want it to do, it'll go away and it'll deliver them for you fantastically. So how do you get to that point? Well, that's where you get into something like using GPT-5 or Sonnet 4, because they work really well for actually going, let's build up this plan about what we want to do. And once you've done that, you take the output and say, right, 5, do it. And it's important to do this because some of these models will cost you in premium requests. Some of them are included. That's the other thing to remember. So 4.1, GPT-5 Mini, they're included in your Copilot. There's no additional cost to use them. But Gemini 2.5 Pro, Sonnet 4, they're going to cost you a premium request each time you go through. And you only have a budget of those included. You can buy more, but it's potentially going to cost you a little bit more. So to save yourself some money and get a better result, learn to master your models from there. There is coming out a tool which will help with this a little bit, possibly. We'll see how good it is in execution. Yeah, as DSR says in the background, yeah, and that's what I'd expect to start with. Is it's going to be a little bit iffy to start with, but it's coming out as VS Code Auto Mode. So it's in insiders at the moment, hasn't made it to the main release. Yep. You can't bring your own keys anymore to Copilot. So that came out initially, and that's something that's been dropped as a capability. We do see situations where you might run into a scenario where organizations are wanting to go more broadly, and that's where they'll do that in addition to having Copilot. So you get some situations where they'll leverage a Claude code, a Roo code, bring their own and tie them in certain scenarios from there. And certain editors make that easier rather than others. From there. But in the end, that's primarily the advantage that potentially brings is about cost management. We can pick a cheaper model and we're potentially paying per token. We're paying per token, not per request. But if you craft what you're doing well within Copilot, the per request concept gives you more predictability in your code, in your costs, which has advantages on there. So again, there's different possibilities on the way through. So the VS Code Auto Mode, what that's going to do is that's going to automatically pick a model for you on the basis of how it interprets your prompt. So it will go through and go, oh, it looks like you've given me a multi-step problem. I'm going to route this to GPT-5. Oh, you've pointed me to a task file and asked me to do that. I'm sending that to GPT-5 Mini. The upshot of that is it means that your premium requests are slightly cheaper. You're only paying 0.9 instead of 1 for those. And at the moment, it's only selecting GPT and Sonnet models, and it's only available in free Pro and Pro Plus. So it's not available if you're on a business or enterprise plan. That will come, but that's not there yet. So auto mode's an option, but I would still recommend spend the time to learn your models, play with them, understand what they're good for, and then pick and choose your model. Don't just keep typing and keep using the same model. Change your model partway through your chat to do the various things that they're best at on the way through. And one thing I love doing is doing something in one, opening up a new chat, getting another one to review what you've just done. It's a great way to get an extra bit of feedback on the way past. Particularly, I like using Gemini 2.5 for that review. I found it to be really, really good from a review side of things. The second thing you need to learn to do. So after you've mastered your models, craft your context. What do I mean by that? Well, if I just verbally dump something into the chat window, the LLM is going to find it hard to determine exactly what I want to do. But on the other side, if I'm too vague or I'm too short, the model's not going to know what to do. And so it's going to start making things up, and it's going to try and make decisions for you and fill in gaps of information that you didn't provide. So it's a balance between being concise but thorough. So be specific. Again, don't say, build me a website. That's going to fall over very, very quickly. I would like a new website that's a static site. I would like it built using Hugo as the framework. You're starting to define much more specificity about what you're actually trying to achieve. You're going to get a better result at the end of it rather than it making a whole lot of decisions on the way through. If you're wanting it to do things and you know roughly how to do it, give it some examples. I want you to go through and replace all occurrences of American English with New Zealand English. So where you find C-O-L-O-R, replace it with C-O-L-O-U-R. It's a trivial example and one you don't necessarily need because the models are smart enough for that, but you get the idea about providing some examples about how to do it. Spend some time and structure your request. Again, think through, I'm going to define this piece here. And then so I'm going to talk about one task, and then I'm going to talk about something else. I'm not going to mix what I'm talking about at varying points in the conversation, because again, the way that these models work, it's all about probability. So the more you separate the pieces of relevant information and scatter them through the request, the harder it is for it to actually bring it together and to do that. And the other key one is when you change context of what you're trying to do, what you then want to do is also create a new chat window. So go up into the top corner and say, hey, when you go up into that top corner, what you want to do is go, right, give me a new chat. I've asked you to do the infrastructure as code for my new application. Now what I want you to do is I want you to go in and actually flesh out the application. Let's move over, start a new chat, means that you're not polluting it with all the old context on the way past. So one task per chat will give you better results on the way through. So think, for example, if you write a sample, write an introduction for a weekly newsletter. It will give you something, but it might not be what you want, and you'll go back and forth and converse and have to change it. But if you said, write an introduction for a weekly newsletter, including the following: the company name, an exuberant greeting, thanking the team for hard work, positive outlook for the coming quarter, and it's signed by the senior leadership team, which one of those two is going to give you something you can use off the bat? Probably that second one. But you're also very specific. It's dot point form. LLMs love dot points. So use them rather than a lot of words on the way past. And coming back to the know your model, each model does have ways that it likes the requests to be structured. It's changing. The models are starting to get a little bit more conformed, but it is something that's worth thinking about if you are going to heavily use a particular model, and we'll talk about this as we start to go forward of other ways to do it. Structuring your request in the way that the model expects it to be structured will again give you better results. So again, defining things in tags, for example, is a good example of how that can work from there. And it's always, as I said, a trade-off. The more context that you give it, the more accurate results you're going to be, but it's going to cost you more in tokens, which comes back to the question of bringing your own keys. That doesn't matter from a Copilot perspective, but there again is a limit to how much context an LLM can cope with. Eventually you reach the point, and if you've used Copilot for any length of time, you've seen that point where it gets into the chat and it says summarizing the context. That's usually an indicator of it's nearly time to start thinking about starting a new chat and going again. You can get through one or two of those, but by that stage you've started to lose a lot of the context, and again it becomes very difficult for the model to understand what it needs to do. Okay, how else can we supercharge our workflow? Well, there's a few basic configurations in your IDE that can make life a lot easier. So for example, with VS Code, if you in your settings.json set chat agent max requests, that'll tell you how many requests before it asks the I've been working for a while, do you want me to continue question? So by default, that's set to 10. Doesn't take very long for Copilot to go through 10 requests sometimes. So pushing that up to a slightly higher amount, particularly if you're keeping a bit of an eye on it, means you prompted less, you can get more done. The auto-approve list of tools. Be careful on that one. You don't want to just go and say, yeah, use RM minus RF wherever you want to, because that'll end up with problems for you. But you can selectively allow certain tools that you're comfortable with it. Yes, go ahead and create directories. That's fine. Yes, move around. As you start doing that, there's new functionality in VS Code as well, where you can do it inside a workspace. Yes, in this workspace, run these tools, and we'll talk about tools a bit more with MCP servers from there. The run task setting, this is an excellent one to have. Because if you've set up your tasks JSON file in VS Code to be able to build your app, for example, or run it to test it, if you tell Copilot it can use those tasks, it doesn't have to guess how it runs your application. It can just use it. It doesn't have to guess how it tests the application, because it goes, oh, I've got a test task, let's run that. In VS Code, Visual Studio, if you go into Tools, Options, GitHub Copilot, you've got your Enable Custom Instructions. That allows the use of the Copilot instructions.md file. We'll talk about that shortly. Agent mode, you'll want to use agent mode. And again, tool approval, which ones can be used. Right. So we've talked about context, we've talked about models, we've talked about your IDE. Now, how do we set a repository up so that we can actually get a whole team working? Because all of that stuff that we've talked about to this point is how do I improve my own workflow? But now what we want to do is take that out and share it to the rest of the team that's working. And we do that through files that we commit into our repositories. So most of these live under the GitHub folder. We have our Copilot instructions.md file. So this is described as your AI onboarding guide. It's an introduction to say, this is what you need to know to get up to speed really quickly about what's going on in this repository. The best way to create this is to ask Copilot, create me a file with all the information that you need to get going on this. Then start a new chat window, have a look at this file. Is there any information missing from it, from this repository, that you would need to get started as a junior developer? And we'll talk about all of these files individually. We have the instructions folder. So that's where you can set particular sets of instructions for particular paths in your repository. So you've got a front-end folder. What rules and settings do we need to know when we're dealing with the front end of this application? We've got a back-end folder. What rules and settings match for the back end? We've got an infra folder. What rules settings do we need to know inside the back end? No point in talking about how to do React when you're to an agent when the back end's written in Python. It just consumes your context. It just confuses the LLM. So leverage the so use Copilot instructions for the brief overview. Use the instructions files to give particular ones for your paths. We have, Sinan.
We have a monorepo.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say we have Angular, React, and multiple backends.
Yep.
And mostly we open those subfolders in separate GitHub, VS Code or IDE. So what is the best practice for Copilot instructions? Right now I'm creating .github folder.
Yep.
Is it the way to go?
You do need to, because it's going to go looking for these files from the workspace root. So if you're opening a workspace partway down your tree, you're going to need to create these files at the point where it's opening up from the IDE side of things. Yeah. What the challenge that you're going to run into, of course, in a monorepo situation where you're doing most of your development work by only opening in a portion of the tree, is then if you want to leverage things like Coding Agent's not going to look in the right places for these, because it's going to look from the root of the repository, not look at the root of a folder. You could create some links around. That's probably the simplest way to do it. From there, there is a solution coming, and we'll talk about it. We have chat modes. We'll talk more about chat modes, but this gives you the ability to configure your agent to be a specific agent to do specific things, and we'll talk about these in a little bit. There's the models folder, which gives you the ability to set up prompt files for GitHub models. Now, technically, they don't have to be in the GitHub folder. They can be anywhere, because when you use the actions like the AI inference action, you point it to a specific folder, a specific file to load a prompt. But it's worth understanding them. They're a special form of a prompt. We won't talk much about them today. And then we have the new file, the new kid on the block, agents.md. So to Sanan's question about what's the solution for this, agents.md is a new standard that's come out in the last couple of months that's intended to consolidate all of the possible different files that currently all the different tools use to define it. So GitHub uses Copilot instructions. Klein uses a Klein.md. They all use different files. Oh, sorry, Klein's rules.md, and Anthropic uses a Claude.md. And so the standard now is, in the same way that you would commit a readme.md in the root of your repository, that's the introduction for a human. Your agents.md is your introduction for your agent. And then what you do is you use directory-specific agents.mds in order to say, for this folder, this is what you need to know about this folder. So it's always going to look for the closest agents.md. So that would solve the problem once that's fully supported across all the tooling for the scenario where you have a mono repo that you're opening up to a subfolder. because you'd use the local agent's MD there. But if you're then running it in Copilot Agent, you're working from a certain place, and it's going to use that agent's MD as well going forward. And where can you get all of the prompts and the chat modes and everything and the instructions, DSR? Awesome Copilot. So this is a repository from the Microsoft and GitHub team, and DSR has a large number of the commits into that repository, giving you example prompts and chat modes and instruction files that you can just click a button, import into your code base so that you've got the ability to use those as you go forward. So let's talk about agents.md. What is this agents.md? What you want to be doing in here is adding information that you want an agent to know or remember every time it starts a new chat. So when you start a new chat in VS Code, the moment you start running it, the first thing you'll see at the top is I've loaded certain items of context, and it's always going to look to agents.md Copilot instructions. There's no fixed structure for this, but the sorts of things that you want to cover are things like that project overview. What is it that we're doing here? This is my awesome website. This is my really, really important API that orders me pizza. This is whatever it is. What's the structure of it? Where am I going to find the relevant files? How do I do that? What's my tech stack that I'm using? Are we using Node? And if we're using Node, what version of Node are we using? Are we using Java? What version of Java? Are we using Spring Boot? What are our tooling that we're using? This is where you get to define for a coding agent what it needs to know when it needs to get up to speed. Because the last thing you want is, yep, we've got a Java, but we're meant to be using Spring Boot and it's off using some other framework to do the development for you. Yes, it'll work, but now you've added a whole lot of tech debt to your code base. Add that sort of information into your agent's MD file, you're going to get a whole lot of information there. Coding guidelines, as we say with Python, must conform to PEP 8. But more than that, are you using Black? Are you using IsoSort in order to make sure that your imports are all sorted? These are the sorts of things you want to be specifying so that when the coding agent goes, it knows what it needs to do. How do I build my application? How do I test my application? How do I validate what I've done is correct? We put all of this information into Agents MD. Now, some of those, like the coding guidelines, build instructions, they might be better off in folder-specific ones or in some of the folder-specific instructions that we'll talk about, where you can scope them to particular file types from there. So it's not always a hard and fast rule about what needs to be in each file, but just these are the sorts of things that you want to be asking and having in from there. Question? Yeah, sure. As I say, we'll get all of these up as part of the recording, so you can grab all of these if you've missed them on the way past. Okay. Yep. Yep. Like one of these. That's where I grabbed this from. So yes, Agents MD. There is a website, Agents MD, for it that describes what it is, the purpose of it, and it does come with a whole stack of examples about what you might want to have in your Agents MD. And this is a sample. So dev environment tips, testing instructions. Where's the CI plan? What are the PR instructions? So if you're creating a PR, what's the format that needs to do? What do I need to do beforehand? I've got to run the linting. I've got to run the testing. All of those sorts of things need to be part of it on the way through. That's the sort of thing you want to do from an Agents MD. And one thing that might be worth thinking about, particularly as we're starting the move over to Agents MD and Copilot instructions is still in use, although it's becoming less and less important, is again coming back to that idea, symlink it. Create it once and then just create a symbolic link between them. That way you get all the same information. Or alternatively, what I've also done for a Copilot instructions is to say, hey, go and reference Agents MD for all the information that you need. So anything that's still using Copilot instructions will pick that up. If it was using Agents MD, it'll read it, it'll be told to read it. Well, it was already reading it anyway. The potential downside of symlinking is you might end up with it twice in the context. It's not a big deal, but as a potential challenge from there. Instruction files. So this is in the instructions folder under GitHub. they need to be named something.instructions.md. So there is a naming convention for these. If you don't name it correctly, it won't be picked up correctly by Copilot. But this is where you would add specific information you need for different parts of the code base. Again, AgentsMD will take over some of this, being folder specific. The advantage, though, of the instructions.md is you can specify a file type with a glob pattern, so ****star.py, for example, and pick up every Python file across the whole environment. So therefore say this only applies to Python files. And then you can have a different one that is star.js, only apply to JavaScript files, which may be scattered across different parts of your code base. So that's where these instruction files still have particular use, is where you're doing it on file type, not specifically on folders. And this is where, as I was sort of talking about, covering particular things about your specific tech stack, coding guidelines, build instructions for particular languages. Now, a note at the bottom here, it's only used by Copilot Review, Code Review, Coding Agent, and Copilot Chat and VS Code. So if you're using Visual Studio, if you're using IntelliJ, these instructions.md files are not being used for those. That doesn't stop you from referencing them if need be, and that's part of crafting your prompt. You can always reference any of these files manually, but the question is, are they being automatically picked up? And here's an example of an instructions.md file. So this one here for React. And you see how it's got the glob patterns there apply to the star.jsx, star.tsx file. So it's going to look and apply that across that file type across the whole code base, and says this is how we're doing React, for example. Our prompts.md. So I talked about crafting your context. The context is key. Being really clear about the prompts that you're using in order to achieve the outcome that you want. The best way to do that is to refine your prompts over time. The problem is, if you only ever type them into the chat window and send them off, then 3 days later, yes, you can go back to your history, but you forgot what you typed. And so what we can do now is leverage these prompt.md files where you save a prompt and then you can go back and you can craft it and tweak it and change it. And so particularly if you have a repetitive task, leveraging a prompt.md file is really, really useful. What it means is, again, we can distribute this. Let's take, for example, let's say you do all your work tracking in GitHub issues. But what you want to be able to do is craft up, and the way that you work is to get the issues really well crafted with a lot of description and a lot of information in them before you then assign them to somebody to actually go and work with. So you've spent time to work through it, you've spent time to craft through it. What you could do with a prompt file is say, okay, I want to now action this. And so therefore, let's craft up over time from the senior devs, what does a really good prompt look like for going and reading the details out of the issue, which is what we'd use an MCP server for, taking that and processing that and turning that into the actual code that we want at the back end of it. And when we run into a problem because it didn't quite do something that we wanted it to do, we go back, we update the prompt file, commit that as part of a change. Now everybody gets that new prompt file. And if they're in the habit of using those files, and the way you use them is just // and your VS Code will start to give you a list of prompt files that you've got listed by their name. That's what the star needs to be. It will be the name that it appears to you as. And then you can use that prompt and you can give it a little bit more information. For example, let's say build from issue is our prompt name. So we / build from issue. We enter the issue number, because that's something that's obviously going to change. And maybe there's a small amount of extra detail we need to provide. We provide that and we go. Now that prompt file could be 40, 50, 60 lines long with a whole lot of really specific instructions and clear instructions about how we actually step through this. And because we've shared it and refined it, that brings everybody up to speed really, really quickly in terms of that. And so that's where, as I say, we share and create and share those battle-tested prompts. And what it can help us to do is to enforce the best practices that we have for AI-driven development. And so this is where we go through a phase, rather than just vibe coding. And who's heard the term vibe coding? We all should probably by this stage. So vibe coding is the situation where I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to type what I'm thinking into the chat and just let the LLM go. And so I'm very vague in what I'm trying to do. So what you end up with is the LLM, the model, having to really try and understand what you're doing, and it's making a lot of decisions on your behalf. What that means is you're going back and, no, I didn't mean that. I would like you to do this and that. What we're better off doing is going back to the way we've always built software, which is to actually take a moment to think about what we want to do. So let's plan out what we're going to do. But we can use a model to help us plan. So if you build up a prompt that's designed around planning, help me to build out a plan of what I want to do. This is what I'm thinking. Let's have a conversation. Let's start to put a plan together. Then what we do is we get it to document what we've discussed. Put this into a file so that we can track this. Or what I've just done recently, spent half a day conversing with the LLM. What we need to do is we need to migrate this application from one cloud provider to another. Here's the code base that we've got here. It's got ties into everything. Help me to work through the steps that we're going to need to go through in order to uplift this code base and move that over and do that. So I sat and chatted with the LLM for a while, and I built up a solid plan. And then I said, now that we've got our plan, I want you to go and create all the Jira tickets that need to be created in order to make this happen. I didn't have to touch Jira. Yay! Yeah. It would be nice if we were in GitHub for that. And then what we do, having documented that, then we go into act mode. Right, I'm going to act on this and work this through. And where this comes in for this, and we're going to see this with chat modes, is each of these prompts we could fire to a different model. So we know our models. The plan mode, we're running through that with Sonnet 4. The document, maybe I'm using Gemini 2.5. The act mode, well, I'm throwing that one to GPT-5 Mini because it likes doing that. And I can then just go away and do all of that side of things. And then we have a review stage. What worked, what didn't. Let's come back and tweak our prompts on the way through from there as well. And so what we can do is a couple of configuration settings that you can put into VS Code. These prompt files are only supported in Visual Studio and VS Code. So again, sorry, IntelliJ or Xcode users. But you can configure in VS Code, here is my commit message prompt. Here is my pull request description prompt. So you can, again, have a prompt that says, if I'm crafting a pull request, what do I need? What's the format that I expect it to be in? What does my commit message look like? So that when I'm in my editor, I can just get Copilot to generate those for me, and away they go from there. And I know that they're going to meet those corporate standards, for example. I don't have to think about that because we've documented it and we've shared it. And this is what we see here is what a prompt file looks like. Again, what mode? We're running in an agent mode. We have a description so that we can know what's going on. Here's my goal. Act as an expert product manager. DSR would recognize this one. I've stolen this one, I think, from Awesome Copilot. What's the output format that I want to generate? What's the structure that we're going to generate? See how we're being very specific to the model. But I don't have to remember that every time I want to run a PRD, a products requirement document. So that's what a PRD is. So we can have the conversation, we can generate that document, it comes out, and I didn't have to spend all of that time retyping that prompt. It's the advantage of reusing our prompts as we work our way through. On that note, GitHub in the last 2 weeks released a new tool called SpecKit. The point of SpecKit is to help with that workflow. So when I'm talking there about planning, documenting, acting, and reviewing, SpecKit will step you through step by step. They use different terms in terms of that around what you can do, but it's all driven off prompt files. So again, highly recommend go and check out SpecKit. Again, there's the link and the QR code up in the top corner there for it. It's a completely open source tool. They're iterating on it rapidly at the moment, but you download it, install it functionally into your repository, and what it's going to ask you to do is start building through a product specification. I want to add a shopping cart to my website. Right, let's set up the foundations of what is non-negotiable, what's not right. What does the shopping cart look like? How does it need to work? Do we need to be able to add products, remove products? What's this flow going to look like before we even touch a line of code and how that might look like? Once we've built out what it looks like, how would we break that down into pieces? How would we then go and implement it? So SpecKit will step you through doing that. I had a wee play with it in the past week. Sadly, it came out, or I got notified of it 2 days after I spent my day going through everything in Jira and stuff, because it would have solved me a whole lot of prompting if I'd had these ones available to me at the starting point from there. But, you know, it's the way these things go. So we talk prompts. Now we're going to talk about chat modes. So chat modes are very much like prompts. There's just a subtle difference to them. So if we take a step back and understand how LLMs work, is when you're communicating with an LLM, in the background, there's what's called a system prompt. So a system prompt, when communicating with a large language model, defines some very broad concepts about what it is and what it's doing. And from the system prompt, then what you have is your user exposed prompt, where the user is then interacting. And the system prompt gives you a whole lot of extra guidelines around what it can and can't do. So for example, from a Copilot perspective, GitHub Copilot, the system prompts that are used by Copilot with the models that are in the background are saying things like, you are a coding guru, but you do not talk politics, and you don't know how to do this, and you can't do that. Because the point of GitHub Copilot is to focus on helping you code. So by excluding a whole lot of other things, it stops it from wandering off into the weeds in places where you don't want it to be going. Chat modes help us to do that. While we're not changing the system prompt, what it allows us to do is kind of define a more broad prompt that goes as part of the user prompt to help us define what we're doing. So what that means is it can pre-configure the chat agent. So you can have your 3-year-old chat mode. It's programmed to say one thing to you. Why? Ask you the questions to push back. You could have a DSR's got his janitor one. What's the tech debt from here? How are we going to resolve that? You have the critical review chat mode. I want you to go in and I want you to look at this and I want you to critically analyze all that's been done from here. Don't just accept it and ask me enough questions until you're satisfied about, I know what I'm talking about on this. I'm not just making up because I heard somebody say it. These are all the sort of things that you can bring into your chat modes to change the way that your conversation is going to go on. So combine a chat mode with a prompt, for example, around planning. So here I've built my plan. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a chat mode, which is a BA chat mode, for example. You're a business analyst. You're seeking to understand business requirements. Then you can ask it, how does this meet the requirements of the business? And what you've done is kind of shifted the thought and the idea of how the model is going to operate. It's not thinking now as a coder, it's thinking as a BA, a business analyst, or as a quality analyst, or a tester. You see, you can now kind of give your models different personalities and get them to query and work through it. You are an expert security researcher who is well-versed in offensive techniques. How would you break into this application? I don't know whether that'll work because they might filter the content out on some of that, but that's the sort of thing that you could be looking at. Question?
So your BA mode you gave the example of, would you call it BA.chapter?
Yep, correct. And so how this appears in the VS Code, so it's only in VS Code. In your chat window, down in the bottom corner, you've got your little selector, but we'll say agent. If you click on that, you've got ask mode, edit mode, agent mode, and then all your chat modes are listed underneath that. So when you've defined them, you just go in there, pick the chat mode that you want to operate in. The other thing that chat mode is also, so it is really good, is it allows you to enable specific tools automatically within this. So we come back to now a discussion of MCP. So MCP servers, model context protocol servers, will give you 3 things out of them. The key one that we're talking about here is they give you tools. Tools are ways of interacting with other systems. So it might be create me an issue in GitHub. It might be read the contents of this repository. It might be list all of the pull requests. These are tools that the GitHub MCP server can go and take for you. They can go and list maybe artifacts or releases from other repositories. Yeah, question? Yes, all the time. I was just bemoaning to DSR before we started about how frequently it doesn't always jump in and use the tool calls, and sometimes you actually have to go and thump it on the head and say, by the way, you have MCP servers, please use them. Indeed I do. Anyway,
Good chat.
but this is where, for example, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have our system architect chat mode. And I'm going to enable the Microsoft Learn documentation, so the MCP server. And then what I can do is say, you're a system admin, go and define and tell me, does this meet best practice? And because one thing you have to be aware of with the tools is the more tools that you make available. So going back to MCP and tools are things you can do. What you do is they present it to the model. So the model could go, I have these tools available to me, and can make a decision based on the name and description of the tools if it wants to call them. When it wants to call them, it will let the agent know. The agent goes and does it, passes the information back. As I say, if you're interested to know more about that, I'm doing a presentation on this next week. But if you add too many tools, your context window gets blown out. And the worst offender is the GitHub MCP server. So that's partially a problem, because it has so many tools available, which is great, but the problem is it consumes a whole stack of your context. So with chat modes, you can go and say, well, my BA chat mode doesn't need to know about GitHub, so ignore all the GitHub tools. But what it does need to know about is these tools. My system admin, my enterprise architect, my system architect needs to be able to go and check all of the well-architected framework documentation. So let's make these available. And you specify those different tools that's available for you, and therefore you're keeping your context tight by specifying this is who you are, this is what you're doing, you're not going to go and do these things. It allows it to keep the model much more focused in that task. And again, it helps you to repeat the same tasks more quickly. What it also allows you to do is specify which model to use by default. And so again, this is where you build up your chat modes to say, you're the BA. Well, we need to understand requirements. Therefore, I'm going to need a model like Sonnet 4 or maybe even Opus 4 that can think, that can reason, that is really strong in those things. But I don't want to use that all the time. You're the junior developer. You're the one that just gets given the list of tasks and you go and execute them. You use GPT-5 Mini. Good question. I don't know. I imagine so, but I don't know. In terms of that, you don't have to specify a model in a chat mode. So you can, but you don't have to. So if you don't, it would pick whatever model that you've got selected in the chat mode. In the chat window. And it will default to this. You can always go and change it. Whether you'll be able to set a default of auto, I don't know. But it kind of defeats the purpose of a good chat mode to go to an auto model. Because what you actually want to be doing at this point is keeping your tasks narrow and focused and moving between chat modes for the different stages of what you're doing. And so, again, this one here, generate an implementation plan for a new feature. What tools are available? I can look at the code base. I can go and find test files. I can get a list of GitHub repos. You're in planning mode. Your tasks to generate an implementation plan. Do not make any code in it, just generate a plan. So you're being very specific. You're not having to type this out in a prompt over and over again as you work your way through. And you can share it with the team. That's the best part on that as well. From there. Bonus file. Since we've talked about a whole lot of files and we've talked about MCP servers a lot, highly recommend adding the mcp.json file to your VS Code directory. Don't configure your MCP servers in your global settings, because they'll just end up polluting your context. Use the mcp.json file to define your MCP servers in the repository, which means you can define the specific MCP servers that you always need for the repository. Now, it would be nice if Coding Agent would use this file or a file like this. Hopefully we'll get there, because then you can predefine the repositories aren't so bad because you define it, but it'd be nice to have it committed into code. But anyway, so if you're using chat modes, that's why I put the bonus file here after chat modes. Chat modes lists the tools that you want to make available, User MCP.json file to make sure that those MCP servers are configured so that those tools exist for whoever's actually using that chat mode for you on the way past. So couple them together on the way past. And it allows you to reduce the number of default tools that you have. Again, if your stack that you work with all the time is identical, if you're only ever dealing with Java, it's probably not as big a deal. Certainly for myself as a consultant, I probably use 12 different tech stacks a day. It seems like sometimes being able to put a whole set of different MCP servers in on the way past makes life so much easier from there. And this is what an MCP server, an MCP.json file looks like. It's exactly the same settings that you'd load in your VS Code from there as well, but by bringing it into the repo. So we've got here locally run ones, for example, the Azure one, a remote one, the GitHub one there, the Markdown, which runs via Docker. So these are some example ones that you can load up and run from there. I mentioned very briefly the GitHub models, the prompt YAMLs. Again, these are very much like the prompt files, but they're YAML rather than being Markdown files. The key difference is for configuring GitHub models. So has anybody used GitHub models yet? Does anybody know what GitHub models is about? No. So GitHub models is a way to get access to the same models that run underneath Copilot for testing from an application perspective. So you can kind of spin up and do side-by-side comparisons to understand how does this model respond, how does this model respond. And so you can get a list of comparisons out of things like that. It also enables you to do great things with the whole concept of continuous AI, which is a term that GitHub have coined, where now in our actions files, we can start using models to do work. So now instead of, for example, I want to make sure my documentation inside my repository is kept up to date. Therefore, on every pull request, I'm going to run an action that will go and use an LLM to summarize what's happening in the code base and update my README file. And it gets committed into that pull request and as part of the approval process. And every time a new push comes in, we make sure our documentation is updated. Or, if it worked, we go out and we update our Jira. Because here's our pull request. I know which Jira ticket this is for. Code has come here. Developers don't have to go near Jira again. Yay, they all say. And things like that. So that's where we can start to get the LLMs going for doing a lot of this stuff for us from there. And as I say, it's useful for evaluating the capabilities from an application perspective. And it has a more specific syntax. And this is where, for example, here we've got the role system and the content. That's where I talk about a system prompt, as I was mentioning. So you can define something very specific. The example here is one that GitHub have. If a workflow failed to run for whatever, this workflow kicks off, uses the AI inference action with a prompt like this to analyze the logs of the failed run and to make recommendations about what needs to be fixed in order to prevent it from running and failing in future. So it's part of that whole automatic site reliability engineer concept. How do we get these tools in, analyzing logs and helping us to solve problems without having to get there first? And GitHub Models helps us to do that from inside GitHub. Ooh. Whose brain is full? Any further questions that come out of that? Any questions from online? Because I'm not looking at the chat. Their chimes.
We have one from Guang Liang. So his question is, can we ask Copilot to log all the prompts per user that we are sending them within the repo and categorically to specific folders?
So can we log the prompts from Copilot? I don't know. I don't think there is that capability from a policy perspective to be logging the prompts that are going through. No. Yeah. Yeah. So the question coming from the back from DSR is what's the purpose of looking to log those prompts? Is it about understanding what people are doing and where, therefore, to kind of get those prompt files generated initially? Is that kind of the aim and the intention of that? that's going to be starting to have conversations with the team. But this is, I think, also then tied in with that broader side of things about having the conversation within the team about moving to leveraging these kinds of tools, these capabilities, and then getting suggestions and getting, in a sense, people to go, well, I've started using this, I'm going to commit it, and I'm going to share it with the team, and then we can all iterate on it together. That's the mindset as well, is that we don't have to think about getting those prompt files or those chat mode files perfect. Let's iterate on them. Let's go, hey, I wanted to do this. This is what I crafted. I got a really good result out of this. Let me save this for future use, but let's put it into the repo so that we can actually therefore have multiple people using it. We iterate on it a little bit more and we improve each time on the way through. Yep.
Wouldn't you actually save on history?
You can save your history out of Copilot, but it's
automatically done. That would maybe answer the question.
It's only saved locally in the history of for the user, and I don't think it moves between IDEs from there either. So I think it's kind of locally saved with the agent in the IDE from there. So, and I don't think there's a way of easily. There's no supported way that I'm aware of, and I'm happy to be corrected, of getting any of those out automatically in terms of that. So. And part of it, particularly from like the business and enterprise, it's not going to be logged on the Microsoft side because that's one of the promises that they make. Because again, the other thing is that you're also, when you're talking about what's going back and forth, there's what you've typed into the chat window, but then there's also all of the context that goes along with it, which is more than what you've just typed into the chat window. So if you reference a file, there's chunks of the file get sent as part of that context. And you can just watch what's going back and forth as you see the flow going through the chat window of, I'm reading these lines of the file and I'm reading these lines of the file. So your chat, like the actual prompt history and the context is growing very, very rapidly on that. So even if you were logging that, it's always going to be hard to find where was kind of the original request to come back into that one specific prompt. And again, most of the times you do it once, it's like, oh, I need to refine and work from there. So there would be a lot of work even to try and pull that together from automated logs, I think. Probably a best case. Maybe it's something somebody could try, something I haven't tried, but at the end of a really good summation, ask Copilot to generate the prompt file for you off the basis of what you asked it. Get the agents to do the work on our behalf. It's a good way of doing it, at least as a starting point. And then you go in and review it. Trust but verify. That's what you always have to do with LLMs.